today is Thursday, October 14th, 2004. We're here at the Halfor Community Services Building as part of a project sponsored by the Milwaukee Jewish Historical Society, a direct service program of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation, in honor of 350, the Jewish Jubilee year of Jewish settlement in the United States of America. Good morning.
Good morning.
Would you please be kind enough for those who will be watching this to state your name and who you are and where and when you were born?
Well, I'm Robert Habush. I'm a practicing attorney in Milwaukee. I was born in Milwaukee on March 22nd, 1936.
And going back a bit, Bob, where do your parents and your grandparents come from, and how long have they been in Wisconsin and in the States?
My parents, Jesse and Beatrice, her maiden name was Liebenberg, were born in the United States, both of them. Their parents immigrated from Europe. My maternal grandmother was from England. My maternal grandfather was from Germany. My paternal grandfather was from White Russia. And my maternal grandmother was from Poland or Russia, depending on where the border was at that time.
Your mom and dad, I don't know, if they were from Milwaukee. That means they're born here. They weren't. When did they move here?
I believe they both were born in Milwaukee. Both of my parents.
So since you're a Milwaukeean and come from stock from Milwaukee, you've had obviously your whole lifetime experience here. Could you tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up in Milwaukee as a youth?
I had what I consider a unique Jewish experience growing up in Milwaukee. And the reason I call it unique is because I grew up in the western part of Whitefish Bay. This was during the latter part of the Depression and the start of World War II. It was a highly Gentile, specifically Catholic neighborhood. And I had no Jewish friends to play with as I was growing up. And there was a great deal of anti-Semitism at that time, apparently in their homes from their parents. And that was expressed to me in physical ways and intimidating ways, so that early in my youth, from kindergarten on to maybe the 5th grade, it was not infrequent for me to be involved in being attacked, being beaten. And it really lasted up through almost 6th grade when I became so adept at fighting back that it was very discouraging to these people, because I would take them separately and not in a gang and just beat the hell out of them. So it ended physically probably around the 6th grade. But prior to that time, I tasted anti-Semitism in a way that most of my contemporaries who I've discussed this with didn't. And the only explanation I could give was the makeup of the neighborhood. And it was at that time that you may recall that the Catholics were taught in their churches on Good Friday that the perfidious Jews killed Jesus. And it was particularly on Good Friday that these beatings would occur. And interestingly enough, my wife, Mimi, who grew up on the west side, but at that time was in a highly Gentile neighborhood near St. Robert's School, experienced the same kind of intimidation that I did. Fortunately, she wasn't beaten, but she was chased home by kids who called her a dirty Jew, et cetera.
Having said that, or not putting it aside, but taking that into consideration, how was it for you, not in terms of the experience with the other kids, but how did it feel being Jewish growing up in Milwaukee?
I felt isolated. I felt different. And it actually continued into high school. I was punished in high school by the football coach for not showing up at the first football game of the season because it fell on the air of Yom Kippur, and I wasn't able to play. And when I came back to practice that following Monday, instead of being on the first team, I was on the third team. And the coach said to me, "Habush, you have to decide whether you want to be a rabbi or a football player." Now, in this day and age, they would never get away with something like that. But back then, and we're talking talking about 1952, 53, they did. And it's something that even continued into high school. Now, I was the only Jew on the football team. I was the only Jew on the basketball team. And being an athlete kind of protected me from more discrimination. Because once, in those days and age, once you were a good athlete, religion didn't make a difference. And so you became closer and friendly with the Christian kids. So this very much shaped my life and my attitude as a Jew.
Well, speaking about the attitude and the participation as being a Jew, you mentioned not playing football because of the high holidays. Were you and your family members of a synagogue, or growing up, from your elementary to high school time, did you participate in Jewish activities beyond synagogue?
My parents belonged to Temple Emmanuel on Kenwood Boulevard.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Sunday school there. I was confirmed there. My dad came from an Orthodox family. My paternal grandfather was a member of the Old Beth Israel on Teutonia. I was bar mitzvahed in that old temple on Teutonia. And so I took private Hebrew lessons. There was no such thing as a day school. And when I was 13, of course, I was bar mitzvahed there. He was, in certain traditional ways, my father was very strict. And yet I would call him reform in the true sense of the word. And they were not involved in Jewish organizations, my parents. I remember later in my life when I was probably late teens or college days that my father was involved in the Federation. That I remember specifically him being involved in the parlor meetings that occurred with the Six-Day War, Yom Kippur War, and I knew that he gave and contributed to the Jewish campaign, the annual campaign, but I don't think he ever was active in any organization where he devoted time. To him, it was just writing a check.
You mentioned your grandfather and your father in terms of involvement and Jewish identification. I've just brought in it for a moment. What fields of industry or careers were they involved in?
Well, my father was an attorney, and my grandfather worked for Lampen Electric for maybe 30, 40, 50 years. He was a real staunch employee of that company, and they sold lamps. That's what I remember about his career. My mother was a house person. She raised the children. She did not have a career.
Okay. People viewing this will know, and some won't, but many will, the Habush name, certainly in terms of Jewish community life, and we'll talk about that in a moment and beyond that. But given your background and your earlier years, what got you started in Jewish community life?
That's a question I've asked myself over time. I don't remember anything that triggered it particularly, but as I said a few moments ago, the early experiences of being Jewish and being discriminated against because of it just made the flame burn a little brighter and hotter of my identity of being a Jew. And instead of hiding it, I was proud of it and never thought to run away from it. So when I got back to town in 1961 and started practicing law.
From college and law school, you
This
mean?
would be from law school. I had gone in the Army prior to that time. It seemed natural for me to become active, and by active, being involved in committees or being involved in the Federation. And quite frankly, it also was a way to get known. It had not a completely altruistic motive to it. As a young lawyer, you want to develop contacts and meet people, and this was a perfect way to do it. And just over time, the efforts it was comfortable for me. I never was, for instance, interested in general civic organizations. That never interested me. To me, it was more important for me to contribute what time I had or what talent I had to Jewish causes. Because I always felt there wasn't a lot of Jews to go around, and there's a lot of Christians taking care of Christians, and they didn't need me as much as I thought the Jewish organizations needed whatever time I could devote. So I never had that tension between working for the United Way, for instance, as opposed to working for the annual campaign. You know, I never desired community notoriety in the sense that I would be known as a community philanthropist. To me, my philanthropy would always be restricted with just modest exceptions as far as Jewish organizations were concerned.
Right now, for those watching this, and along the same theme lines, you some years back had a very important position as the president of the National Trial Lawyers Association, ATLA, and which is a major position in the general community by any standard. And I also know from firsthand experience you've been given those opportunities, but have generally declined them in a Jewish context beyond Milwaukee. So does that hold true with that same philosophy of focusing your attentions locally?
Yes, I just didn't covet or think it was necessary for my own satisfaction to become nationally involved in national campaigns for the UJA, for instance. I know after I was campaign chair in 1994, I think 95, I guess some people identified me as a possible future leader for a national position. They were always looking for recruits, and I just resisted that. I just had no interest in that. And to me, they needed me in Milwaukee. There was plenty of need in Milwaukee, and I thought I could be more effective in the small pond than swimming around in a big ocean.
What drives you to continue doing it? Because you've been at this for a fair number of years, taking on innumerable roles, always with a lot of drive and energy, and sometimes challenging roles, sometimes roles that others might even consider mundane. So you've been equally supportive of so many different opportunities. What drives you to continue to want to provide that kind of leadership and support for the community?
I don't know. My wife has asked me that question a number of times. I guess I'm one of a category of people that feel comfortable with leadership. I guess that's the word, comfortable. And I don't ever seem to burn out. The flame never seems to burn out, and that's true in my profession as well. A lot of people ask me why don't I retire, be a lawyer, a trial lawyer, because I still have the fire in my belly to do that, and I still have fun doing it. And the same as with my Jewish community activities. To me, it's not a sentence to hard labor. To me, if I didn't enjoy it, despite the usual aggravations associated with it, I wouldn't do it. So it's that same passion that's hard to explain why it sustains itself. And I've always looked somewhat, perhaps judgmentally, with disdain among those who come and go, assume positions of leadership for 1 year and 2 years, and then they disappear into the landscape. You never see them again. I don't understand people like that. Either you have commitment or you don't have commitment. I don't see how you have commitment for 12 months or 24 months and then you don't have it anymore. Like you served a sentence, at hard labor, and then you were pardoned, and then you were gone. Either you have the commitment or you don't have the commitment. And we are fortunate in this community to have other people who have stayed around a long time like I have, and bring experience to the table that you not otherwise would have if you keep turnover and turnover. And I remember a conversation I had with you some years ago that I was going to be around for the long haul, and I'm going to continue to be around as long as I'm healthy and able to do it.
Well, we've talked about it. We've missed a component which I want to touch on, your involvements nationally and in your career field and your vast involvement locally. But you've been involved, provided some leadership, and been committed to overseas issues and to Israel in particular for many years. When was the first time you traveled to Israel?
Oh, God. It was shortly after the Six-Day War. It would have been in the early 70s. I think I've been to Israel a dozen times. I can't give you the specific dates, but I'm sure it's been that much. A couple times with family, the whole immediate family. Other times with missions, leadership missions. Trying to remember if I ever went there on a social trip. Just to go there like you go to Italy.
Vacation.
I don't think so. I don't think I've been there that was not associated with some organizational purpose or leadership purpose.
Well, then, what's your personal connection through that to Israel? What's your sense beyond your personal connection to Israel of Israel's relationship to the diaspora in terms of its role in Jewish life?
Some of that is learned behavior. As a very young man, I was at those meetings when the Six-Day War occurred. I don't remember too much. In 1948, I would have been 12 years old. So I don't think I was terribly focused on the birth of Israel, and the war they had there. I think the first time I may have been introduced to that would have been the movie Exodus, with Paul Newman.
Mm-hmm.
So I think my first emotional attachment was during the emergency of the Six-Day War, where whether Israel was going to survive was possibly in question, and then the pride that everyone felt with the way they dispatched their enemies in such a short period of time. That was a zenith of Jewish pride in the state of Israel. I've never had any trouble identifying with the importance of our relationship with Israel. And how important it is for Jews to continue to support Israel, whether or not they, in a sense of the word, prior to the recent years, need us economically. And so even when there's been policies there that perhaps I questioned, like others, that never deterred me. My attitude towards Israel or the need for the survival of the Jewish state was never influenced by whether or not I liked who was leading the country, or whether they did something I didn't like. That was, I can't put myself in their position. I don't live there. The only people who live there are the ones that should determine what their fate is. And people who live in the United States, in the comfort of the United States, shouldn't be so judgmental about people who every day they go to the store or get on a bus are never going to know whether they're going to live or die.
Bringing our conversation, our focus back to our community here in Milwaukee, since your vantage point is rather broad over these years, representing both a lot of organizations, a lot of causes, and through the Federation, where you've applied a lot of your trade to the broadest segments of the community, what's your personal sense of Jewish life in Milwaukee today and the future of Jewish life in Milwaukee?
Well, first of all, I'm optimistic for the sense of Jewish life in Milwaukee. I'm not concerned that young Jewish couples are going to flee this city. I think the contrary is true. I think you're seeing young Jewish couples coming back to Milwaukee from around the country. It is a wonderful place to raise a family. All you have to do is go to the community center or any Jewish festival and look at all the young couples. You see what I'm talking about. The same with the Jewish Day School. How many children, including my grandchildren, are in the Milwaukee Jewish Day School? Jewish education, which never existed when I was a young man, and when I was a parent, there was no Jewish Day School to send my children to. So I think the Jewish culture, the Jewish religion, and the Jewish community is stronger today than it's ever been. And I think one can be very hopeful and optimistic that that's going to not only stay the way it is, but improve.
One more attempt to broaden that issue for you personally. Do you have a philosophy of life that either growing out of your personal experiences or your professional life, it doesn't have to be a Jewish philosophy, that you've learned, or lessons that you've learned in life that have carried you through and you think would be helpful or instructional to people to know about?
Well, I talked about my early introduction into anti-Semitism, which lasted well into high school, and I know that it still exists today. It's just less overt, than it used to be. I had an experience, a tragic experience with one of our children who became gravely ill as an infant from a defective vaccination, which shaped my attention not only to legal redressing, particularly pharmaceutical companies, but also my passion and compassion for the disabled, which I and my wife both directed towards Jewish Family Services, who is the agency that takes care of people who are challenged, either mentally or physically or both, and in other ways, families in stress. So it has directed our philanthropy with more emphasis on helping the disabled and special needs programs and perhaps other programs. That was a life-changing experience for both of us, which has definitely been a part of the philosophy, as you put it, of what we're doing. But overall, my overall philosophy is that when I can say I'm comfortable in a financial way and have all the needs that I personally think make me comfortable, I don't have to hoard or feel that I have to have every nickel that I've ever accumulated stay in personal investments. Or to put it another way, you call it tzedakah or whatever you want to call it, I've always been driven by the fact that I'm not reluctant to contribute to the lesser fortunate. And I think that is not only part of the Jewish culture, it should be, but it's part of my personal culture. And so to the extent that I'm able, I've always been of the mind that the people who have been fortunate enough to be successful in a financial way ought to share that with people who are less fortunate. And I'm sure many people feel the same way. And I always put it that you give from the heart and not from the brain. You know, and I think we've lost a lot of that emotion in recent years, that the giving is, as I want to say, is people give like accountants. I don't mean the profession of accountancy, but they give in a calculated way, a mathematical way, rather than what they feel in their hearts is necessary. And part of the passion for Israel, I think, in the generations after my generation has abated. There is more emphasis on local needs, which I think is good, but not at the expense of having no passion for the overseas needs. So I guess it's just a philosophy of wanting to share.
Hey, Bob, in your personal life, in your communal life and activities, and certainly in your professional career, you've had a fair number, more than most, of accomplishments. Is there anything that stands out to you that you're either most proud of or is most significant to you?
You know, I don't know how other people feel that have had similar accomplishments. To me, it's kind of amusing when I stand back and look at how my life has been and how a wonderful woman I married, Mimi, and how gratified I've been of my children and my grandchildren. And I always kind of frame it as it's been a great run on Broadway. You know, it's kind of amusing, actually. I've tried very hard not to take myself too seriously. My wife has assisted me significantly in that endeavor, that I don't take myself too seriously. So I've never felt that the accomplishments were anything more than just the milestones in your life, and that it didn't mean that you could then rest on your laurels and you've done enough, you've done enough, so it's all over. Now I can go fishing and just go retire and look back and say, boy, it's been terrific. Well, it has been terrific, but to me, it's only a journey that I hope hasn't ended. I hope will not end soon, and I'm proud of those accomplishments. And one of the great benefits to a person, if they can enjoy what they've done, kind of smell the roses type of thing, and not always be looking for a next plateau so you can never enjoy your accomplishments. That took me a while to learn how to do. But once you accomplish that ability, then you truly are a happy person. You don't overestimate your accomplishments in a sense that you don't have to do anymore, and it doesn't make you crazy that there's always someone who's doing better, someone who has more money, someone who's won more victories in court. You know, that kind of attitude is devilish, and fortunately I've been able to avoid that.
This question then may not be germane because of something you said a few moments ago in this interview, and that is that as long as you're still kicking and have your health, you're going to stay the course and be involved and continue to progress and contribute. So the question would be, even if it's only hypothetical, any regrets, any things you haven't accomplished, any things you're not pleased with?
I regret I wasn't a better father because I was so preoccupied with the career. Sometimes we get home after the kids were asleep, and sometimes leave in the morning before they got up. Sometimes was unavailable to their activities. I consider myself a better grandfather than I was a father in terms of attention to the kids. But I know that it's a very common problem that professionals and business people, men and women, have in developing a career. So that's a regret. In terms of choice of professions, I have no regrets. In terms of who I married, I'd marry Mimi today again. We've had a wonderful marriage, 47 years together, a lifetime. Obviously, I have a regret that my daughter was terribly damaged. If I had one wish in life to change, I would change that. I guess looking ahead, my only regret would be that I can't live long enough to see certain things happen with my grandchildren, see how they turn out. And now I look at milestones. I want to live long enough to see my first grandchild bar mitzvah, and then bat mitzvah, and then I want to live long enough to see them graduate high school. Then I want to live long enough to see them get married. I want to live long enough to see them graduate college. At some point, I'm going to hit a wall. But I want to push that point off in a wish list as long as I can.
Then we'll move away from that. But one more question on a particular level, but from a different nuanced vantage point, and that is a lot of people know you or think they know you because you're a public person, and you do have a lot of friends and family. In that mix somewhere, is there something about you that no one or very few people know that might be interesting? You have a hidden talent or a particular interest or something that people wouldn't think of in the context of Bob Habush and this? Oh, really? I wouldn't have thought that.
It's a difficult question because you're asking me to be very introspective and self-analysis.
Well, it doesn't have to be. Maybe, I don't mean to go that direction. It may be, and pardon me for interrupting, it could be just a skill that you have that people will be surprised to hear about you.
I know what you're asking. My wife Mimi would say that I'm a lot softer than my image. I'm a lot friendlier than my image. I'm more sensitive than anyone could ever imagine. And I'm even more shy than anyone could imagine. In social situations where I could go to a party or something, I don't know anybody, I'm not comfortable walking around and greeting strangers and saying, hello, I'm Bob Habush, who are you? So, in terms of the image you portray as this tough trial lawyer and this tough operator, that's not the real me, as the one closest to me has been able to convince me. But, how people look upon you as with infrequent contacts and how you really are in the privacy of your home or with your loved ones and your close friends are oftentimes a completely different picture.
Well, speaking about how people are looked upon, as you just stated a moment ago, is there a particular way that you'd like to be remembered, since this is sort of a legacy discussion, by others in the community?
I've said this before in discussions with my children, and I would say this as a message to my grandchildren who may be looking at this tape, years from now. It's not important if you just are born and you go about your business of survival, and then you die, leaving no legacy behind, that you were there at this point in time and made a difference, that you made a difference in people's lives. And I've been able to do that as a lawyer, making a difference in people's lives, and hoping that they're better off after they've been with me as a client than they were when they came. And in the community, you hope that you've left a lasting legacy as well. That years from now, when they're looking back at pictures on the wall or leaders, that they will look upon me like they look upon Max Carl, for instance, or Phil Rubenstein. That they were important to our community, and they did a lot of good for other people. You know, while at the same time they were doing good for themselves and their family, they reached out, and that's the legacy that's important. That it's that you just don't exist because millions of people do. That's all they do. They exist, and they're selfish. They're just into themselves. They never reach out to help the less fortunate, the less healthy, and that I think is what drives me in part, and what I would hope that my children and grandchildren will perpetuate into the future.
Bob, before we conclude, is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about, or anything else you'd like to share with those who will be viewing and listening to this?
Well, I'm always concerned as a Jew of the well-being of Jews everywhere, and I'm always concerned that what happened in Nazi Germany in the 30s and the 40s could not happen here in the United States. I'm concerned about the present state of our government and the ideologues that run it, and the dominance of religion coming back into public life. And I think that we just have to be watchful and vigilant. And I always felt that if we were threatened here in the United States, that because we're Jews, and I believe that could happen, that I would take the family to Israel, because I'd rather perish, if that was going to be, fighting with other Jews than being herded into camps like they were in Nazi Germany. So all these thoughts have influenced my life, and I'm fiercely a defender of Jews everywhere, and the people who I know. And even today, I wouldn't take any kind of overt anti-Semitism and just walk away from it. I was a fighter when I was a kid. I was a fighter as I grew up. I've been a fighter all my life, and the older I get has not tempered my emotions at all. If anything, it's just to sharpen them. And so that's how I view myself, and that's, I think, how people who are close to me view me as well. My daughter and grandchildren call me Mufasa. Now, I didn't like what happened to Mufasa in the movie The Lion King, because he got pushed off a cliff. But the reason they call me Mufasa is I give them a sense of security, and that they know I will always take care of them as long as I'm around and protect them. And I accept that label with honor and appreciation.
Thanks for spending the time with us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.